Hello, Leonid. Nice to see you again.
Well, great. We're moving on, and likewise.
I wanted to talk to you about something because, as you know, Rocío, my daughter, is almost 14 years old. So, one of the hardest lessons that I've learned is that her condition is going to be for her entire life. And that may sound dumb, but it was quite a realization for me because when we started, I gave my 100%. And eventually, I burned out, of course. So I don't know what you've seen in other families or what is your opinion, but to me, this has been a big issue.
Mm. Well, that's a very true and important component, right? So that because it in itself it kind of has two sides of it, right? So one is that the early start, right? The early start, and when the child is like in the baby years, right, or the early toddler years, and especially since they are smaller than the healthy kids and so on, and obviously not being able to do things, so that we kind of have the very like not just eternal babyhood, but the first 3, 4, 5 years they're really like a babyhood. And when you look at the child who is that small and so on, your internal calculations always get messed up. Because, again, think about it. It's like your fast processing intrinsic systems, they're telling you, okay, that's a baby. Babies, they grow up and they become well. So, and that's really even unconscious thinking. And it takes a while, especially if the child, like in the beginning, nice and tiny, little, cute, dressed and all, everything looks cute and so on, to connect that okay, this is my child and she has this diagnosis and so on, and then she's 2, she's 3, she's 5, and then I see those kids who are 14 or 15 and say, oh, gee, is this that's what's going to happen? Is this really her 10 years down the line? The mind blocks it. You just don't think about those things. And you just kind of either you get yourself into the Paralympic mindset or you get yourself into like just into the daily.
Denial.
Yeah, it's a denial. Yeah, but it's a denial. I mean, I don't like the word the denial in that sense. It's a flip and switch, right? So you see, basically, it's just getting into the daily routines, just doing more, 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 more. Just get yourself on the hamster wheel. So you wake up. We're already late. We have that many things to do. So we have a full packed schedule. We are late here. We are late there. Let's say let's feed, let's cook, let's do this, and then by the end of the day, you're like that, and then you drop
And you
semi-dead.
don't think about
So you
what
drop
choice you
semi-dead,
make.
let's say only to get the alarm or whatever, or the child crying and calling you at 6 a.m. or whatever, 7 a.m., and you just like again, and then you get into this whole hamster wheel again. So just getting any sorts of distractions, just not to think about it, right? Because it's sort of it sounds like it looks such a huge contrast, right? And that's what we're getting really back to this thing. Inevitably we are geared and we are wired to see the outer side, right? To see how the others see the child, because we are the tribal animals, right? So in that sense, we can't help but to see even our own offspring through the lens of the tribe. Because basically, that's how the humans evolved, right? So in the tribes of 100 to 150 people, and then if you didn't fit your tribe, so your chances of survival were very poor. So we are the descendants of the people who are tribal. And that's why, when you look at the different age of a child, you really switch on the external lens, not the internal lens. And that's a very, very, that's a very tricky point, and that's a very difficult thing to overcome. because that affects your whole performance. You don't plan ahead. You don't think ahead. You don't build the incremental advantage, and the whole thing becomes this kind of spikes of activity and hopes and so on, and then you get tired and then disappointed, and then boom, it falls, and then it becomes a depression cycle and so on, and then you find some new hope and then come up again and so on. So, but it's to understand that really what you have to be zooming in is how to meet the child, right? Is that, and even that, the 14, 15-year-old teenager and so on, this is the person who has been evolving. And understanding what are the real challenges that they are going to go through. You always have to think ahead. And there's two components there. One component is what you were saying, is that, well, she's going to be like this for a long period of time, right? So you see that's for her life, right? In terms of she will need external help, she will not be independent, that's kind of what it means to be like that. On the other hand, it's what phases will she go through. And it's understanding that, that the child will go through the phases of the several growth spurts and several boosts and several challenges, like the ages between, say, 5, 7, 6, 8, like the first conversion from baby to the child, right? And then the period of whatever it is, 10, 11, or sometimes like 12, 16, so when they will be getting the puberty and the growth and so on, so where the most of the challenges and the distortions set in that define the troubles in the later periods of life. So you have to be aware about that. And that's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to keep that line in mind, because it's kind of, I don't want to believe in that. But the problem is that I don't want to believe in that actually, unfortunately, translates into much greater troubles and pains further down the line and along the process as well. So that's why we're touching on a very sensitive point here. But again, it's all about that lens, about the moment you change the lens, the moment you meet the child where they are, the moment you start seeing those capacities that they have and allowing them the opportunities to develop in that sense. But on the other hand, trying to learn and understand what's going to happen later, how you can get yourself best prepared and best equipped, what are the capacities that the child can develop to meet those challenging periods in the best possible way. That's what you have to be aware of, right? And that is really the capacity of a pro parent, right? Not the amateur, but a pro. That's what defines the difference between the amateur and the pro. Being able to face it as opposed to denying it, and then after facing it, to process it and to turn it into this source of empowerment. Source of empowerment, on the one hand, it's giving you the greater enjoyment and the greater rewards of paying attention and living those moments today, connecting and actually, not just fast forwarding through them, but actually really enjoying them today, and really living in that sense today. But on the other hand, it's not living in a kind of dream about the future, but actually working for the future, right? So that's really important thing. So you dream today about today, right? And you meet today. But on the other hand, you don't dream about the future. You meet the future. You work for the future, right? You understand, you look at the transitions, you look at the statistical averages, and you want to do what you want to do. You want to beat the statistical averages, but little by little. You don't say, oh, I'm here, and then, somehow I'm going to get this, major leap and jump. That's impossible. So, but what you can do, you want to start earning your compound interest. It's the power of the compound interest. That's what you have to understand, that you're not spending today, you're earning those little compound interests of that are building from your child's capacities. And then if you do that, then those compound interest, that's the magic of it, right? 1% interest, when it's like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and so on, it's not interesting, right? But you take, let's say 100 iterations, it becomes huge. So that's
Yeah.
really the biggest point. And we're not used to think in terms of the compound interest, right? We're not used to think in those what I call the power laws and the exponential lines, right? It's again, we are very linear in our thinking, and that's really the key to, if I, as I said, if I use the formula, it's like, don't dream about the future, enjoy today as if it was a dream day, but at the same, within that dream day, you work for the future, right? And work for the future in a smart, compound way, when you want to be earning for the future and making that whole capacity of the child to build through. And that's particularly important for the kids who are who are younger.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because actually when I burned out, Rocio was like 7 years old, and I asked myself one question: how do I want to live in 10 years? How do I want my life to be like? And it was very different than it was back then. So I started to work different changes until that will get me to the life that I wanted to have in 10 years. That's I think helpful question for the families. How do you want your life to be in 10 years?
Absolutely. And that also comes into another, big point, that, so many families and so many parents I spoke to, they actually, it takes them a while to confess into this, but it's like one of these underlying big things, that what if, what happens if I'm gone, right? So how, what if something happens to me, who is going to take care of her, right? So that's also one other thing, right? Is that, like, I try to do the most today and build as much as possible today, because if I don't do it today, maybe if something happens to me, well, she's going to be completely unprepared and not equipped, and then the other people would be able to handle her. I'd say that this mentality is very natural, but at the same time, it's probably the most destructive thought that you can have. It's even worse than Paralympic mentality, because that kind of kills you today, and that also creates a completely wrong timing. It's kind of, it becomes it jams the today, so that it puts into this negative perspective. Be like the insurance company. Think about yourself statistically. Your chances of living another 20 years or whatever, they're quite high. So don't overthink what's going to happen to you. Just take it statistically. And then remove this thing, and then meet the child where they are and build this compound thing. Don't get into that part, what's going to happen? So your question, how do I want our life, right? And not only my life, right? How do I want our life to be in 17 years or in 10 years? And what range of capacities still makes me happy, right? So that's a really big question. If you ask a question today, say, you know what? If in 10 years from now, doing wise, she is not critically different from where she is now, but she is safe, she is metabolically stable, she is happy, she is able to have this non-verbal connection with me, and so on. What am I going to look at it like this? Is it going to be a good outcome? Is it going to be a good thing to have, or am I going to consider myself a failure? This is really a critical thing, right? So you see, what's the minimal outcome that you are happy with? And really, this is it. So what you've been, actually bringing in is that if you take this say and say, well, you know what, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, even if she is as happy as today and as capable as she is today, so I'm still considering this a success. I'm still happy. I still have my moments. I still been enjoying being the parent, and I've been, let's say, enjoying that special connection with my child. That's the base. So, and everything that you earn via the compound interest on top of that, that's a very welcome bonus. But if you earned more or less, right? So you see, in that sense, if you have earned a very steady head control and, the communication through sound and so on, that's a bonus, that's great. If you have earned some ability to use the hand to point things and so on, that's great. But if you didn't, it's not a disaster. So this is really very important to calibrate that range in such a way that you can really meet the right level of the criteria and saying, well, that is still a good life. This is still the life which is worth living. This is still the life where we have this connection. This is still the life when I feel good about it. Right? So you see that, because this is where you are in the relatively robust situation. So that's maintaining the robustness, right? Because, the trouble is when you fall into the fragile situation, right? So if the child is in pain, if the child faces the distortions, if the child kind of faces, whatever, all sorts of troubles and actually struggling for life, that's what you don't want to be, right? That's the position you don't want to be in. And but to avoid that struggling for life, this is, the good news is, if you start at that point where you are building, meeting the child's capacity where they are, and, like working through your daily care and so on, you can build that robustness quite consistently. So that's really, I would say, the key message of this longer term planning. There's plenty of more to say, but I guess we will wrap it around on that. And sort of let our viewers to process this before the next episode.
Okay. See you next time.
See you next time.